The air inside the cathedral was heavy, too heavy for something meant to be sacred. The scent of white lilies mixed with gun oil and expensive cologne, wrapping around the guests like an invisible noose. Every whisper echoed through the marble hall, bouncing off the tall, stained glass windows that threw fractured colors across the cold floor. Elena Ward stood before the altar in a gown she didn't choose, in a wedding she didn't want, waiting for a man she had never met. The fabric of the dress was as heavy as the lie that brought her here. Pearls shimmered faintly under the dim light, catching the glint of her trembling fingers. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. The pain in her legs had long numbed into a dull throb. Her breath caught every few seconds, not because of nerves, but because her corset was laced too tight by hands that didn't care if she could breathe. Poor girl, a woman whispered somewhere in the crowd. She's been standing there for hours. Has the groom run off? Another replied. Elena didn't lift her eyes. She couldn't. If she did, she'd see them. Hundreds of eyes watching, waiting, judging. She could only glance at the single person who mattered, a frail woman in a wheelchair at the front row. Grandma Rose sat quietly, her wrinkled hands trembling on her lap. Her nurse hovered behind her, ready to help if she fainted. It was for her that Elena was here. For the oxygen tanks, the hospital bills, and the debt that had swallowed their lives whole. The priest shifted nervously at the altar, his old hands tightening around his Bible. Perhaps we should. The silver ring on his finger, glinting like a warning. In that same hand, a gun gleamed beneath the holy light. The priest froze, his face draining of color. No one spoke again. Outside, thunder rolled like distant applause. Inside, the silence was a blade. Elena wanted to run, to tear off the suffocating gown, kick off her heels, and disappear into the night. But she knew she wouldn't make it out alive. The cathedral was filled with Don Raphael's men, dozens of them, suited shadows lining the pews. Each carrying a concealed weapon, each trained to kill without hesitation. "Where is my son? Where is Luca?" Don Raphael bellowed, slamming his hand onto a pew. No one answered. "I asked a question." A trembling underboss stepped forward. "We've sent for him, sir. He should be on his way." "On his way?" Raphael's laugh was a sharp bark. "He's hours late to his own wedding. My son is a disgrace." Elena's pulse quickened. Maybe he won't come. Maybe this will be called off. "Please, let this end here." She stared at the tall wooden doors, half hoping, half dreading that they would remain closed. Then, Master Luca has arrived. Every head turned. The heavy doors groaned open. 2 men in black suits stepped in, dragging another figure between them. Elena's heart sank. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and terribly handsome. If only he hadn't been completely drunk. His blonde hair fell into his eyes. His shirt half open, his steps heavy and uneven. The sharp scent of whiskey reached her before he did. "So this is the heir I'm marrying. Luca Vercetti, the infamous heir of the Vercetti syndicate. The next Don, the man whispered to control entire cities before his 30th birthday, was being held upright like a rag doll. His head hung low, his lips parted slightly as he mumbled something incoherent. "Luca." Don Raphael's anger melted into forced joy. "My boy, There you are. Elena swallowed hard. The guests murmured in disbelief. Even the priest looked ready to faint. The two men dragged Luca to the altar. He didn't resist, but his knees buckled as they tried to keep him standing. When his head tilted slightly, the soft light from the stained glass finally revealed his face. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. He was striking, beautiful even. His jawline was sharp, his skin sun-kissed, his lips curved naturally, as if he were always smirking. But what made Elena shiver wasn't his beauty. It was the faint scar along his temple, a reminder that this man had seen violence up close and hadn't flinched from it. Don Raphael turned to the priest. Proceed with the ceremony. The priest hesitated. Sir, the groom seems unconscious. Perhaps. A deafening crack echoed. The Don had slammed the butt of his gun against Luca's head. Elena gasped, her heart leaping into her throat as Luca's body jolted. Blood trickled down his temple. Wake up, Raphael roared. A groan escaped Luca's lips. Slowly, painfully slowly, he lifted his head. His blue eyes opened, glassy but vivid, scanning the church in confusion. Then they found her. For one eternal second, Elena forgot to breathe. Those eyes, icy, focused, cutting straight through her, met hers. Who? His voice was low, rough, still thick with alcohol. Is she? That's your bride, Don Raphael snapped. Luca blinked, swayed slightly, then stared harder at Elena, as if trying to place her in some distant memory. She's not my bride. Gasps filled the room. Don Raphael's smile vanished. What did you say? I said. Luca straightened, his voice stronger now, dangerous. I will not marry anyone but Serena. The name hit Elena like a slap. Serena. So there was another woman. Don Raphael's expression darkened to pure rage. You insolent fool. You'll do as I say. He grabbed Luca by the collar, but Luca shoved him back, an act that froze everyone in the cathedral. The underbosses tensed, hands twitching toward their jackets. Elena's knees went weak. He's going to get himself killed right here. You think you can defy me? Raphael hissed. You ungrateful wretch, after everything I've built for you. I never asked for your empire, Luca muttered, eyes blazing. And I won't marry a woman just to save your business deals. The church erupted in chaos, men surged forward, grabbing Luca, forcing him to his knees. Elena flinched as the Don's voice cracked through the noise. You'll marry her, or you'll watch that fragile old woman of hers die tonight. Everything stopped. Elena froze. He knows about Grandma Rose. Luca looked up sharply, his jaw clenched. He glanced toward her, then to the trembling old woman in the wheelchair. And in that instant, something in his expression changed. The fury gave way to cold calculation. Don Raphael leaned closer, his gun still gleaming. Do it, son, or I'll make her pay the price. Luca's eyes locked with Elena's. There was defiance in his gaze, but also an unspoken apology. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. Fine, I'll marry her. The priest's voice shook as he began the vows, his Latin trembling between sobs. Elena's words came out broken, half-whispered. She barely heard herself say, I do. Luca didn't even look at her when he repeated the words. His tone was empty, mechanical. The moment the priest declared them bound, Don Raphael clapped his hands once. Perfect. Now the debts are settled. Settled. As if her life was a number on a ledger. Elena wanted to scream, but she couldn't. All she could do was watch as Luca swayed again, his body finally giving up. Before anyone could stop him, he collapsed, his head hitting the marble with a sickening thud. The guests gasped. Don Raphael's smile was gone. Get him out of here. Two men dragged Luca away. The others turned to Elena, expecting her to follow. But all she could see was Grandma Rose, crying silently, her frail body trembling in the chair. And for the first time that night, Elena wondered which of them was truly the prisoner. The sound of rain came first. It hit the roof of the speeding limousine like 1,000 quiet accusations, steady and relentless. The city lights streaked across the tinted windows as Elena sat perfectly still, her hands folded on her lap. Every pulse of the wipers matched the pounding of her heart. Across from her sat two silent men in black, their faces unreadable behind dark lenses. Beside them lay the symbol of her new life, a folded veil, a faint trace of blood on its lace edge. No one spoke. No one looked at her. She turned her head just enough to see her reflection in the window. Pale skin, hollow eyes, lipstick smeared at the corner of her mouth. A stranger looked back at her. When the limousine slowed, the reflection blurred into the shape of iron gates, tall, ornate, and cold. Beyond them stood a mansion that might as well have been a fortress. The headlights carved paths through mist, revealing marble pillars, balconies, and guards holding umbrellas like ceremonial weapons. The driver opened her door. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vercetti." Home. The word made her stomach twist. She stepped out, the hem of her gown dragging through puddles. Her heels sank slightly into the wet gravel as thunder rolled overhead. The mansion loomed before her, elegant, enormous, and completely lifeless. Inside, warmth met her like a lie. Crystal chandeliers glowed above a staircase wide enough for royalty. Paintings stared down from the walls, their eyes catching every flicker of movement. Somewhere down the hall, a clock ticked too loudly. Don Raphael appeared at the landing, his hands clasped behind his back. "You'll stay here for now," he said. "My son will return when he sobers up." Elena's throat tightened. "May I see my grandmother first?" she asked. He looked down at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "You will. Tomorrow, assuming you follow the rules." "Rules?" His smile deepened. "Luca has a temper. You'll learn how to live with it. My men will show you your room." She wanted to protest, to scream, to demand freedom, but the words died in her mouth. Two guards appeared, gesturing for her to follow. The hallways were endless, lined with mirrors that reflected her fear from every angle. When one of the guards opened a door, she stepped inside hesitantly. The room was beautiful, too beautiful. Ivory curtains fluttered in the breeze from a half-open window. A canopy bed stood in the center, its white sheets pristine. On the nightstand sat a small glass of water and a folded note sealed with the Vercetti crest. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. Rules for staying in my house. Do not enter my wing without permission. Do not ask questions about my business. Do not disobey Don Raphael. If you break a rule, I'll take something from you. LV. Her breath hitched. The handwriting was sharp, controlled, the kind of script that could cut through paper if pressed too hard. She set the note down, her pulse racing. For the rest of the night, sleep never came. The rain turned to wind, whispering through the cracked window. Somewhere beyond the walls, a gunshot echoed faintly, distant but real. When dawn arrived, gray light spilled across the carpet. A knock sounded. Elena Ward? She opened the door to find a maid no older than herself clutching a silver tray. Breakfast, miss. Don Raphael asks that you eat before he leaves for the city. Elena nodded absently. And Luca? The maid hesitated. Still resting. Resting. That was one word for it. After breakfast, Elena was led through the mansion to a garden enclosed by tall hedges. The air smelled of wet roses and iron. Don Raphael stood near the fountain, a phone pressed to his ear. When he noticed her, he gestured for her to wait. Yes, he said into the receiver. She's here. Tell our partners the debt is cleared. Debt. She flinched at the word again. When he ended the call, he turned. You'll stay until my son decides otherwise. I suggest you make yourself useful. Useful? There's a library. Read, paint, pretend to be content. Just don't cross him. He started to leave, then paused. He'll wake soon. Don't forget your place when he does. The way he said it felt like a promise, or a threat. That afternoon, she wandered the mansion in silence. Every corridor seemed to lead back to the same staircase, the same portraits, the same suffocating quiet. As she passed the closed doors of what she guessed was Luca's wing, she hesitated. Behind one of them, she heard a sound, the faint crash of glass, followed by a low groan. Her heartbeat spiked. Against her better judgment, she pushed the door open. The room was dim, curtains drawn. The air smelled of whiskey and something darker, sweat, smoke, and despair. Luca sat on the edge of a leather couch, head in his hands. A shattered bottle lay at his feet. When the door creaked, he looked up. For a moment, neither spoke. His eyes were no longer glassy. They were sharp, dangerous, and far too clear. A faint bruise colored his temple where his father had struck him, the faint scent of whiskey still clinging to him. Then why do you look at me like you expect something? She didn't have an answer. Luca's gaze softened for a second, just a second, before hardening again. My father forced you into this. That means you're his property, not mine. Don't confuse the two. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. If you want to survive here, stay out of my sight. She wanted to hate him for his coldness, but she saw the tremor in his hand, the weariness in his shoulders. The arrogance felt more like armor than cruelty. Without another word, she stepped back into the hall and closed the door behind her. That night, she dreamt of blue eyes and broken glass. The days blurred. She learned the rhythms of the mansion, the way the guards switched shifts at midnight, the way the cook hummed old Italian lullabies, the way Don Raphael's voice thundered through the walls when he spoke to his lieutenants. Luca was a ghost in his own home. She saw him only at dinner, when he appeared briefly, silent and polished, his jaw tense as his father talked business. He never looked at her, not once, but she looked at him, and every time she saw the same thing. A man trying desperately not to feel. One evening, a storm knocked out the power. Candles were lit across the hallways, turning the mansion into a flickering labyrinth. Elena found herself drawn to the sound of piano music drifting from the east wing. She followed it through the darkness until she reached a half-open door. Luca sat at the grand piano, his fingers moving fluidly across the keys. The melody was haunting, fragile, like a confession whispered in the dark. She stood silently, afraid to breathe. When the final note faded, he spoke without turning. "You disobeyed another rule." Her heart jumped. I didn't mean to." "You always mean to," he said, closing the lid of the piano. "What do you want from me, Elena?" She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Wanted to understand you." He finally turned, eyes catching the candlelight. "You can't understand a man who is born inside a cage. You can only watch him pace." She took a small step forward. "Maybe we're both in cages." Something flickered in his expression. Pain, recognition, maybe both. He stood, slowly closing the distance between them. "Every time you break a rule," he murmured, "I'm supposed to take something from you. My father's words, not mine. Do you know what that means?" She shook her head, breath caught. He reached out, his fingers stopping inches from her face, the warmth of his skin ghosting against hers. "It means I'll end up taking everything until there's nothing left to protect you from." Her pulse thundered. The space between them was charged, dangerous. But when his hand dropped, it wasn't in anger. It was restraint. "Go," he said softly, "before I forget the rules too." She left the room trembling, her heart pounding against her ribs. Behind her, the piano began again, softer this time, almost tender. By the time the storm passed, the mansion felt changed. The silence between them had shifted, heavier now, but less cruel. In the days that followed, Luca didn't avoid her anymore. He didn't speak much, but sometimes their eyes met across the hall, holding for a heartbeat longer than before. And though she didn't understand why, she began to feel the faintest pull toward the man she'd sworn to despise. Morning broke through the curtains like a reluctant promise. The mansion was quiet again, its stillness unsettling after the storm. Elena woke to the faint scent of rain on marble and the echo of distant footsteps. For the first time in days, she felt rested, until a sharp knock shattered the calm. "Mrs. Vercetti," a voice called through the door. "The Dawn requests your presence in the study." Her heart sank. When Don Raphael requested, it meant ordered. She dressed quickly, choosing a simple gray dress that at least let her breathe, and followed the butler down the long corridor lined with portraits of grim-faced men. The study was vast and dimly lit, bookshelves towering around a mahogany desk that could have doubled as a fortress wall. Don Raphael stood behind it, smoking, his gaze cutting through the haze like a blade. Lucas sat opposite him, posture rigid, eyes cold. Elena stopped at the threshold. "Come in," Raphael said without looking up. "We were just discussing our little arrangement." Luca's jaw tightened. "Your arrangement, not mine." "Semantics," his father said smoothly. "You see, Elena, my son believes he can live like a free man. He forgets the world isn't kind to dreamers." She clasped her hands. "What do you need from me?" "Need?" The Don smiled thinly. "You already gave what I needed. The illusion of unity. But unity must be seen. Tonight you will attend a charity gala with my son. You will smile, hold his arm, and convince our allies that the Vercetti bloodline remains strong." Lutha's eyes flicked to her, unreadable. "And if she refuses?" Raphael's tone stayed pleasant. "Then Grandma Rose's oxygen tank may suffer an unfortunate malfunction." The words drained the color from her face. "That's enough," Luca snapped. "Then behave," Raphael said, crushing the cigar into a tray. "Both of you, dismissed." Outside the study, Luca walked ahead without speaking. When they reached the landing, he finally stopped. "He's using you to control me." "He's using both of us," she said quietly. He looked down at her, something almost like guilt shadowing his features. "You shouldn't have been dragged into this." "It's too late for shouldn't, Luca." Their eyes met, the tension that lived between them, anger, fear, the faint spark of something neither could name, was electric. He turned away first. "Be ready by 8. The gala glittered like sin disguised as charity. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across the ballroom. Violins hummed beneath the murmur of silk and money. Elena walked beside Luca, her arm looped through his as photographers flashed their cameras. He looked every bit the heir he was born to be. Sharp suit, perfect composure, a mask carved from arrogance. Only she noticed the stiffness in his movements, the way his hand trembled slightly when no one watched. As they moved through the crowd, guests greeted them with smiles too polished to be sincere. "Mr. Vercetti, Mrs. Vercetti, so glad you could join us." Elena returned the pleasantries automatically, the noise blurring around her until she heard it. A name that froze her mid-step. "Ethan Cole, over here," someone called. Her breath hitched. She turned, and there he was. Ethan, the man she'd once loved, standing near the bar in a tailored suit, laughter lighting his familiar brown eyes. The past collided with the present so hard it hurt. Luca noticed. "Who is he?" She forced her voice steady. "No one." His gaze hardened. "Liar." Before she could answer, Ethan saw her. His smile faltered. He took a step forward, then stopped when he saw Luca's hand possessively resting on her waist. "Elena?" Ethan's voice carried just enough for those nearby to hear. Luca's grip tightened, subtle but firm. "You know this man?" he murmured, tone deceptively soft. She swallowed. "I did, before all this." For a second, the air between the three of them felt like a live wire. Ethan's eyes flicked from Luca to her. "You don't have to." "She's fine," Luca interrupted smoothly, a thin smile curving his lips. "My wife is exactly where she wants to be." It was a lie meant for the audience, but it sliced both ways. Elena forced a polite smile, every muscle aching with restraint. "It's good to see you, Ethan. Please excuse us." Luca led her away before she could say more. The crowd swallowed the moment, leaving behind the faint sting of regret. In the car afterward, silence filled the space between them like smoke. Finally, she said, "You didn't have to humiliate him." Luca stared out the window. He was looking at you, like a man looks at something he wants to steal. He was looking at me, like someone who once cared. He turned then, eyes catching hers in the dim light. Care gets you killed in my world. Something inside her cracked. Maybe that's why you don't let yourself feel anything. His jaw worked, but he said nothing. When they returned to the mansion, she started to walk toward her room. His voice stopped her. Elena. She turned. About earlier, he said quietly. You handled yourself well. It wasn't praise, not exactly, but it was the closest thing to kindness he'd offered. Good night, Luca, she murmured. Days turned into weeks. The facade of marriage became routine. Public appearances, polite smiles, shared silences at dinner. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. He began leaving the door to his wing open. Sometimes she'd hear him pacing, other times the low hum of the piano. Once she found him in the garden at dawn, staring at the horizon like a man searching for forgiveness. She joined him without invitation. You're up early, he said without looking at her. Couldn't sleep. The morning mist curled around them, soft and silver. He exhaled slowly. You should leave this place when you can. She frowned. You think your father would allow that? Not now. But one day, he'll slip. And when he does... He looked at her then, blue eyes heavy with something that felt like promise. Run. Would you come with me? His silence was her answer. Before she could speak again, footsteps approached. A guard handed Luca a phone. His expression changed instantly, the warmth vanishing. What? He snapped. Then to her, stay here. He disappeared back into the house, voice low and sharp. Elena waited, unease coiling in her chest. When he didn't return, she followed the sound to the study door, left ajar. I told you to keep her out of it, Luca was saying. Don Raphael's reply was cold. The girl's grandmother serves her purpose. You know what happens if she doesn't cooperate. Elena's blood ran cold. She's dying, Luca said. Let her be. Mercy makes you weak, Raphael hissed. You want to protect her? Earn it. Take control of what I built. I'll burn it down first. There was a pause, then a chilling laugh. Then she dies with it. Elena stepped back before they could notice her, heart racing. The truth hit her like a blow. She was never meant to be a wife. She was leverage, bait in a war between father and son. That night, she packed a small bag. She didn't know where she'd go, only that she had to try. But when she reached the front door, Luca was waiting in the shadows. You really thought you could walk out of here? His voice wasn't angry, just tired. I can't stay, Luca. He'll use me until there's nothing left. He stepped closer, the darkness swallowing the distance between them. And you think I won't? Her breath caught. Would you? For a heartbeat, his mask slipped. No, he whispered. That's the problem. He took the bag from her hand gently, setting it down. If you run, he'll kill her. I can't protect both of you yet. But soon. She searched his face. Why are you telling me this? Because the next time you try to leave, he said quietly, I might not stop you. And then, before she could speak, he was gone, vanishing into the dark hall like a shadow dissolving at dawn. That night, Elena sat by her window, the moonlight turning the note with the rules, silver in her lap. She read them again, tracing the sharp letters of his handwriting. Block quote. List. Do not enter my wing without permission. Period. Do not ask questions about my business. Period. Do not disobey Don Raphael. Period. If you break a rule, I'll take something from you. Period. Ol block quote. She smiled faintly, whispering to the night, You already have. The next morning dawned in golden silence. A deceptive calm spread over the Vercetti mansion, like the eye of a storm pretending to rest. A knock on the door startled her. "Mrs. Vercetti," said the same maid who'd served her since the wedding. "Don Raphael requests your presence at breakfast. He says he has good news." Good news. In this house, that could mean anything, from an alliance sealed to a blood debt paid. Elena followed her through the long corridors until she reached the great dining hall. Don Raphael was already there, seated at the head of the table, sipping black coffee. Two guards stood at attention behind him. Luca was not. "Sit, my dear," the Don said pleasantly. "Today, we celebrate progress." She obeyed, the porcelain plate before her untouched. "Progress?" Raphael leaned back in his chair. "Your grandmother is recovering well. I've arranged for her medical bills to be paid indefinitely, under the Vercetti name." Elena blinked in shock. "That's kind of you." He smiled, a serpent's grin. "Kindness is a currency, my dear. You'll learn that soon enough." Her fingers tightened around the napkin. "What do you want in return?" He chuckled softly. "You're learning." Then, after a pause, "I want loyalty. You see, my son forgets what's at stake. He speaks of burning empires, of leaving me to rot in the ashes. But you, Elena," he tilted his head, assessing her like a rare coin. "You could remind him where his duty lies." She went still. "You're asking me to spy on him." "I'm asking you to save him from himself. If Luca continues on this path, he'll destroy everything we've built, including you." He rose, placing a hand on her shoulder, cold and heavy. "If you truly care for him, you'll keep me informed." The scent of his cologne clung to her long after he left. That evening, she found Luca in the training yard behind the mansion, his shirt clinging to his skin, his breath ragged. He was sparring with one of the guards, movements sharp and vicious. When he noticed her, he wiped sweat from his brow and gestured for the man to leave. "What did he want?" Luca asked, not bothering with greetings. Elena hesitated. "He said he was proud of you." A dry laugh escaped him. "He doesn't know the meaning of pride." "What else?" Her heart pounded. Should she tell him the truth? That his father wanted her to spy? Or stay silent and protect herself? Instead, she said softly, "He said he's paying for Grandma Rose's care." Luca's expression darkened. "He's binding you tighter. Every favor is a chain." "I know," she whispered. He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed, the anger fading into exhaustion. "I'm leaving for the docks tonight. There's business I can't refuse." Business or trouble? In my world, they're the same thing. When he turned to go, she reached out, fingers brushing his arm. "Be careful." He looked back, surprise flickering across his face. Surprise, then something else. Something softer. "I don't deserve that," he said quietly. "Maybe not, but I'll say it anyway." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You shouldn't make me feel human, Elena. It's dangerous." Then he was gone. Night fell heavy and silent. The mansion felt emptier without him. The air thicker, somehow. Elena tried to read, to distract herself, but her mind kept drifting, to the docks, to the dangers Luca had walked into. Hours later, she found herself wandering the hallways. That was when she heard it, muffled voices from behind the half-open study door. "Found something in the archives," a man's voice said. Don Raphael's answer came cold and sharp. "Speak." The girl's parents, they weren't just debtors. They worked for the Vercetti Front Company 6 years ago. The accident wasn't an accident. Elena froze. Her pulse roared in her ears. "What do you mean?" Raphael demanded. They were about to expose the offshore accounts, the ones tied to the syndicate. So the boss at the time? I was the boss at the time, Raphael snapped. Watch your words. Yes, sir. You ordered the truck. Silence. Then the faint clink of glass being set down. You will forget this conversation, Raphael said quietly. If I hear you've repeated it, I'll have your tongue cut out. Elena backed away, her knees shaking. Her parents hadn't died in an accident. They had been murdered. By the same man who now owned her life. The hallway tilted, the air thinned. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. She stumbled back to her room and locked the door. Her reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale, eyes burning with fury. The truth was a poison, and she could feel it spreading. Luca returned just before dawn. She met him in the corridor, her voice low, trembling. Tell me the truth about my parents. He stiffened. What are you talking about? Your father had them killed, didn't he? The silence that followed was answer enough. How long have you known? She whispered. He ran a hand through his hair. I found out months ago. But if I told you? What? You thought you were protecting me? She laughed bitterly. You're protecting him. His expression hardened. You don't understand the cost of crossing him. I understand the cost of silence. He took a step forward, voice dropping. Elena, listen to me. If you confront him, he'll destroy you. Then let him try. She turned to go, but his hand caught hers. The contact burned, not from pain, but from the raw emotion neither could name. Please, he murmured. Wait. I need time to find proof, to end this the right way. And what if you can't? Then I'll burn it all, he said softly. Even if it kills me. For days the mansion lived in uneasy quiet. Elena kept her distance, feigning obedience, while Luca disappeared into meetings she wasn't allowed to ask about. But tension thickened like smoke before a fire. One night, she found a single note slipped under her door, unsigned but written in Luca's hand. Leave the house at dawn. Go to the old chapel by the vineyard. Bring no one. Her pulse spiked. Was it a trap or a chance at freedom? At sunrise, she followed the instructions. The chapel stood abandoned, ivy crawling up its crumbling stone. Inside, the air smelled of dust and memory. Luca was there, leaning against the altar, a file folder in his hand. His eyes were dark, sleepless. This, he said, handing her the folder, is what he's hiding. Bank transfers, offshore ledgers, your parents' signatures. They were clean, Elena. They tried to expose him. Her throat tightened. Then why are you giving this to me? Because I can't keep fighting him from inside. But you can. I'm just one person. You're more than that. He stepped closer. You're the only person left he doesn't suspect. She looked up at him, heart pounding. You're asking me to betray your father. I'm asking you to help me end him. The air between them felt charged, trembling with the weight of every unspoken truth. Slowly, she reached for the file. Their fingers brushed. A fleeting touch, but enough to ignite something neither of them could deny anymore. For a moment, the walls, the danger, the bloodlines, all of it disappeared. There was only the two of them, standing in the ruins of faith, daring to believe in something pure. I'll do it, she whispered. He exhaled like a man who hadn't breathed in years. Then we start tonight. As dusk fell, the storm returned, but this time it was coming from inside the mansion. Thunder rolled across the horizon, like the growl of something ancient and hungry. By nightfall, the sky above the Vercetti estate was the color of bruised steel, and the air carried the sharp scent of rain and gun oil. Elena moved quickly through the marble halls, her heartbeat sinking with the distant rumble. In her hands, the folder felt heavier than paper, heavier than the truth it held. Inside were signatures, transaction records, and a letter bearing her father's handwriting. She'd stared at it for hours, tracing every pen stroke, every flick of ink that proved he'd tried to do the right thing, that he'd died for it. Now, she and Luca were going to finish what he'd started. Luca waited in the west corridor, jacket half-buttoned, eyes shadowed and sharp. The moment she appeared, he crushed a cigarette beneath his boot and nodded. The guards rotate in 15 minutes. We'll have a small window to reach his office, and if we're caught— He glanced at her, a ghost of a smirk touching his lips. Then I hope you can run fast. Her nerves burned. That's not funny. Neither is dying, he said simply. For the next 10 minutes, they moved like shadows. Every footstep was measured, every breath calculated. The mansion that once felt endless now felt suffocating, a labyrinth of loyalty and fear. When they reached the study door, Luca pressed his ear against the wood. Silence. He nodded once. Stay close. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and leather. Don Raphael's desk loomed like an altar to power, immaculate and monstrous. Behind it, shelves of ledgers lined the wall. Luca crossed the room, rifling through drawers. Elena kept watch, her fingers trembling slightly around the file. "Anything?" she whispered. "Not yet." He opened a hidden panel behind a painting. Inside, metal gleamed, a safe. He knelt and spun the dial. "Give me a second." "How do you know the combination?" He glanced up at her with a humorless smile. "Because I used to hide my sins in it too." The lock clicked open. Inside lay stacks of cash, a few passports, and a single hard drive. Luca pocketed it. "This holds the digital accounts. It's enough to bury him." But before they could move, a voice cut through the quiet. "Going somewhere, figlio mio?" Don Raphael stood in the doorway, framed by the lightning flash behind him. His eyes burned like coals. Luca's jaw clenched. "You shouldn't be awake." "I sleep lightly when my son plots against me," Raphael said. "And you," his gaze shifted to Elena, "you disappoint me most of all." Elena froze, the blood draining from her face. "I save your lies." The Don's voice was soft, almost tender. "I gave you life. I paid for your grandmother's survival. And this is how you repay me?" Luca stepped forward. "Don't touch her." Raphael smiled faintly. "Ah, so this is what weakens you. I wondered." He drew his gun slowly, almost lazily, as if savoring the moment. "Hand over the drive." "No," Luca said, voice low, steady. Raphael sighed. "I raised you to rule, not to feel. Look at you, drunk on sentiment, blinded by that girl's tears." Elena's pulse thundered. Luca shifted subtly, positioning himself between her and the gun. "Put it down, father." Raphael laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You wouldn't shoot me. You're still my blood." Lightning flashed again. For a heartbeat, the world was pure white. Then came the gunshot. Elena flinched, stumbling backward, but the bullet hadn't hit Luca. It buried itself in the bookshelf behind him. Raphael's smirk widened. "Next one won't miss." In the chaos that followed, Luca lunged. The two men crashed into the desk, the gun skidding across the marble. Papers exploded into the air like startled birds. "Elena!" Luca shouted. "Run!" She hesitated, just long enough to see Raphael's hand closing around a letter opener. "Luca, look out." The blade slashed his arm, blood blooming crimson against his sleeve. Luca retaliated with a punch that sent his father sprawling. "Elena, go." Tears blurred her vision. She grabbed the hard drive, clutching it to her chest, and ran, The halls blurred past in streaks of light and shadow. Behind her, echoes of shouting filled the house. By the time she reached her room, her chest burned, her hands shaking. She slammed the door shut, pressing her back against it. The storm outside had broken. Rain battered the windows in furious rhythm. She could still hear the chaos downstairs. Footsteps, shouts, a single cry of pain. Then, silence. She didn't know how long she stood there, frozen. Minutes? Hours? The door creaked open. She spun, heart in her throat, and exhaled when she saw him. Luca. His white shirt was soaked with rain and streaked with blood, but his eyes were alive. "You're hurt." She ran to him, reaching for his arm. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." He caught her wrist gently, his touch trembling. "He's gone, Elena." He ran. She blinked. "Gone?" "He's not dead," Luca said quietly. "Not yet. But he knows we have proof now." Her mind spun. What do? We disappear. Tonight. They packed what little they could. Cash, the hard drive, a few clothes, and left through the servants' entrance. Rain poured down. As they crossed the courtyard, headlights of a black car slicing through the darkness. Inside, the hum of the engine was the only sound. Luca drove fast, eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. Elena looked back once, at the mansion, its windows glowing faintly through the downpour, the only home she'd ever hated. "Where will we go?" she asked softly. "Somewhere he can't reach us," Luca said. "The docks, maybe. I have men there who still owe me favors." She studied him. "You don't believe that?" He didn't answer. Hours passed. The rain eased into a steady drizzle. When dawn finally broke, they reached the edge of the city. Warehouses, cranes, and the scent of the sea. Luca pulled into a narrow alley beside an old shipping yard. "We'll rest here until I figure out our next move." Elena nodded, exhaustion settling into her bones. When she looked at him again, the morning light softened his face, the lines of tension, the shadow under his eyes. He looked human again, not the weapon his father had forged. "Why are you helping me, Luca?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. "Because you made me remember what it's like to have a choice." Her chest tightened. "You think we can ever be free of him?" He gave a small, broken smile. "No one's free in this life, Elena. But maybe we can build something outside of his reach." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe in anything. As the sun rose over the sea, she leaned her head against the cold window glass. Luca's reflection stared back, haunted, protective, and something else she dared not name. In the quiet hum of the car, she whispered, "He'll come for us." "I know," he said. Let him. By the third day, the city had already begun to whisper. News spread like wildfire. The Don's empire in chaos. His heir vanished with the woman meant to keep him loyal. Somewhere, in the shadows of that rumor, vengeance stirred. And for the first time since the wedding, Elena felt the faint, terrifying taste of freedom. The kind that burned just as fiercely as love. Sea wind smelled of iron and salt. Waves slapped against the wooden pier, each one erasing the footprints that trailed behind them. The docks were deserted except for the gulls circling overhead and the rust-streaked freighters that groaned in the tide. Elena pulled the hood of her borrowed coat tighter. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the cold still bit through the fabric. Behind her, Luca slammed the car door and scanned the horizon before joining her at the edge of the pier. "This place looks forgotten," she said. "That's why it's safe," he answered. "For now." He led her toward an old storage warehouse, its metal siding creaking with each gust of wind. Inside, The air was thick with the scent of dust and motor oil. A single light bulb swung from the ceiling, casting a faint amber circle across crates stamped with fading Vercetti logos. "Your father owned this, didn't he?" "He owned everything worth owning in this city," Luca replied. "These warehouses were used for shipments that never made it to the books. Illegal shipments." He shot her a sideways glance. "You learn fast." Elena walked slowly between the crates. Some were marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Others bore faint numbers written in chalk. Evidence, she thought. Every box in this room was a nail in Don Raphael's coffin. But survival came first. Luca found a small office at the back, where a narrow cot and a rusted stove stood waiting. "It isn't much, but it'll keep us off the radar." She sat on the edge of the cot. The exhaustion of the past 3 days crashed over her in one heavy wave. "How long do you think we can stay hidden?" "Long enough," he said, though his voice carried no certainty. He opened the hard drive on a battered laptop. Lines of data flickered across the screen. Offshore accounts, coded names, numbers that could ruin entire families if made public. He worked in silence while she watched, the rhythmic clack of keys filling the space between them. After a while, she asked quietly, "What happens when this gets out?" He didn't look up. "The empire collapses. My father goes to prison, or worse. And you?" A bitter smile ghosted across his face. "There's no place for me after that. I'm his son, his weapon. You don't dismantle a monster without killing the parts that built it." She rose and came closer, resting a hand on the edge of the desk. "Maybe you're not just his weapon anymore." His fingers paused over the keyboard. "Don't say that. It's true," she said softly. "You're the only reason I'm alive." He met her gaze then, the blue of his eyes stark against the pale glow of the screen. "That's exactly why it's dangerous to believe in me." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The hum of the dolb filled the silence, a fragile thread between them. They stayed hidden for 3 days. Each morning, Luca went out for supplies and information. Each evening, he returned with news that grew darker. Raphael's men were combing the city. The police were compromised. The family's allies had placed a bounty on both of them. "Your grandmother's hospital has extra guards now," Luca told her on the 3rd night. "He's protecting his leverage." Elena's hands tightened around the mug of tea she was holding. "Then I can't go to her. Not yet." She stared into the rising steam. "You sound like you still think there'll be a yet." "I have to." "Why?" "Because if I stop, he wins." Something in his voice broke then. Quiet, small. She set the mug down and moved to him. For the first time since they'd fled, she saw how tired he really was. Shadows carved under his eyes, his bandaged arm stiff from the wound his father had given him. "You should rest," she said. He gave a faint laugh. "You forget, I don't sleep easily." "Then I'll keep watch." The words were simple, but they hung between them like a vow. Hours later, the warehouse had settled into darkness. Outside, rain whispered against the tin roof. Elena sat near the small stove, the flicker of flame painting her face in amber light. Across the room, Luca sat with his back against the wall, half awake, one hand resting on the gun beside him. She spoke without looking up. "What was your mother like?" He hesitated. "Gentle. She used to hide my drawings when father called them a waste of time." "What happened to her?" "She stopped hiding them." The pain in his voice was quiet, but it filled the room. Elena didn't reply. She simply listened, and that seemed to be enough. After a long silence, he said, "I used to think loyalty meant obedience, that doing his bidding was the same as being strong. But you made me see how wrong I was." Her throat tightened. "Luca, don't," he murmured. "If you say my name like that again, I might forget who I'm supposed to be." The words trembled with something fragile and forbidden. She looked at him. The soft light, outlining the bruise still fading along his jaw. The distance between them felt smaller than ever. One breath, one heartbeat. But before either could move, a sound shattered the moment. A car engine, then the crunch of tires on gravel. Luca was on his feet instantly, gun drawn, motioning for her to stay back. "Hide," he mouthed. Elena ducked behind a stack of crates, pressing her palms against the cold wood. The warehouse door creaked open. Boots echoed against concrete. "Vercetti," a man's voice called. "Your father sends his love." Luca stepped into the light, gun raised. "Tell him he should have sent flowers." The intruder laughed, a tall man in a black coat, flanked by 2 armed guards. "He wants the drive. Hand it over, and maybe he lets the girl live. I don't negotiate with corpses." The first shot came fast. Wood splintered above Elena's head. She ducked lower, covering her ears as gunfire thundered through the room. Luca moved like smoke. Fast, precise, ruthless. 2 men went down before the third even realized he'd lost. But the last bullet grazed Luca's shoulder, spinning him slightly before he returned fire. Silence fell, broken only by the ringing in Elena's ears. When she dared to look up, the attackers lay motionless, and Luca was leaning against a crate, blood darkening his sleeve again. She ran to him. "You're hit." "I've had worse," he said through gritted teeth. She tore a strip from her coat and pressed it against the wound. "You'll bleed out if we don't get you help." He caught her wrist. "We can't risk hospitals. We move now. He knows where we are." "But you, Elena," his voice softened, barely audible. "If I fall, you keep running. Promise me." "No," she said fiercely. "We started this together." He stared at her, then gave a small, weary smile. "You really are trouble. Then stop saving me." "I can't." They left the warehouse before dawn, the storm finally giving way to pale light. Every mile they put between themselves and the city felt like a borrowed heartbeat, a countdown they couldn't see. By the time they reached the hills, beyond the coast, Luca's breathing had grown shallow. He pulled off the road near an abandoned farmhouse. Inside, dust danced in shafts of morning sunlight. Elena guided him to a chair and cleaned the wound with trembling hands. "You need a doctor." "I need you to stop worrying." "That's impossible." He met her gaze, eyes glassy from exhaustion, but still steady. "You're not built for this life." "Maybe not, but I'm built for you." The confession slipped out before she could stop it. It hung in the air between them, soft and irreversible. Luca froze, a muscle tightening in his jaw. "Don't." "Why?" "Because it's dangerous. Because it's real," he whispered. She could have said more, could have begged him to let her in, to stop running from the one thing that might save them both. But he turned away, gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. Outside, the wind swept through the long grass, carrying the faint scent of salt and thunder. That night, as he slept fitfully on the couch, Elena sat awake beside him. The flicker of a candle, throwing light across his face. The lines of pain there were deep, but beneath them was something achingly human. She thought of the file hidden in her bag, the proof that could end his father's reign. She thought of Grandma Rose, still under the Don's watch, and she thought of the man beside her, whose heartbeat she could almost hear in the quiet. Freedom was close, but love was closer. And both, she realized, might cost them everything. Morning came softly, but the world did not feel new. The farmhouse creaked with age and the smell of old dust, the wind humming through cracks in the window frames. Elena stirred first. Luca was still asleep on the couch, his arm bandaged clumsily, his jaw relaxed in the first real rest he'd had in days. In the fragile quiet, he looked younger, not the heir of a criminal empire, not a man born from violence, but a boy who'd once believed in something better. She rose carefully, pulling on her jacket, and stepped outside. The fields stretched endlessly in shades of gold and ash, dew clinging to the tall grass. In the distance, the sea glimmered faintly, indifferent to all that had happened. The world felt open, endless, yet Elena had never felt more trapped. She reached into her coat and pulled out the hard drive. It gleamed dully in her palm. Proof, power, vengeance, everything she'd wanted, and everything that could destroy them both. Behind her, the door creaked. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Luca's voice said softly. She turned. He stood barefoot on the porch, wrapped in a worn blanket, the morning light catching the pale scar across his temple. "I thought you were sleeping. I don't sleep well when the world's trying to kill me." "Fair," she said with a faint smile. He stepped closer, gaze drifting to the drive in her hand. "Still thinking about what to do with it?" "I could end him, Luca. Everything he's built. Gone. The banks, the lawyers, the offshore webs. It would all burn." "And what happens after it burns?" he asked quietly. "Do you think they'll let you walk away? The police are his puppets. The men who work for him will want revenge. You'll start a war." She looked at him, heart tightening. "Then what do you want? To keep running?" "No," he said simply. "I want to finish it right." His words were steady, but behind them she heard the exhaustion, the fear. He was fighting to keep control of a world that had never belonged to him, and for the first time, she saw how close he was to breaking. They stayed hidden another day. Rain fell again by evening, gentle but cold. Elena cooked what little food they had left over the small stove, while Luca tried to repair the car's engine outside. At one point, he came back in, hair damp, hands stained with grease. "We'll be ready to move tonight," he said. "I've got an old contact near the border. He can get us out." She didn't answer. "Elena," he said, noticing her distant look. "What is it?" She hesitated, then handed him the drive. "I don't want it anymore." His brows knit. "Why?" "Because it's all I've thought about since we ran. Revenge, justice, survival. I don't even know which one it is anymore. But it's eating me alive." He stared at the drive, turning it slowly in his fingers. "You trust me with this?" "I already have." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he placed the drive in his pocket and stepped closer. "You shouldn't have." "Why?" "Because if something happens to you," his voice cracked, low and rough, "I'll never forgive myself." Her chest ached at the sincerity in his tone. The distance between them dissolved. She lifted a hand, brushing her fingers lightly against his jaw. "Then don't let anything happen," she whispered. The air between them was electric, heavy with everything unspoken. Luca leaned closer, his breath warm against her skin. But before their lips could meet, a sound split the silence. A single car engine. Headlights flared through the window. Luca cursed under his breath, pulling her down behind the table as tires screeched on wet gravel outside. Shadows moved against the walls. "They found us," he said. "How?" "Doesn't matter." He drew his gun. "We have to move. Back door, now." They ran into the night, rain soaking their clothes as they sprinted toward the tree line. Behind them, shouts erupted, men barking orders in Italian, flashlights cutting through the dark. Elena stumbled, nearly falling. Luca caught her, pulling her up. "Keep going." Gunfire cracked through the rain, bark splintered around them. They dove behind a fallen log, panting. "What now?" she gasped. "We circle to the cliffside. There's an old path, leads down to the beach." She nodded, heart hammering. Together, they crawled through the mud and ferns, the thunder of waves growing louder. When they reached the cliff's edge, Luca stopped. Below, the sea churned violently against the rocks. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow slope cutting toward the shore. "We can make it if we're careful." Before they could move, another voice cut through the storm. "Luca!" Don Raphael stood behind them, coat whipping in the wind, gun steady in his hand. His eyes burned with fury and pride. "End of the line, son." Luca turned slowly, shielding Elena behind him. "It doesn't have to be this way. It always had to be this way." Raphael's voice was calm, almost sad. "You think you can destroy me with that little toy? That you can steal what's mine and run?" "I'm not running," Luca said. "I'm ending it." But Don's eyes flicked toward Elena. "And you, girl, I gave you everything. Your grandmother breathes because of me. I could end that with one call." "Then do it," she said through clenched teeth. "Because I'll never belong to you." Raphael's jaw tightened. Brave words from a pawn. He raised the gun. The shot echoed across the cliffs, louder than thunder. Elena flinched, but it wasn't Luca who fell. The gun clattered from Raphael's hand as he staggered backward, a crimson bloom spreading across his shoulder. Behind him, one of his own guards lowered his weapon. "Orders changed," the man muttered before disappearing into the storm. Raphael collapsed to one knee, clutching his wound. Luca stepped forward, gun still raised but trembling. "Why, father? Why kill them? Why ruin everything?" "Because power," Raphael rasped, "is the only thing worth loving." Lightning flashed, illuminating his blood-stained smile. "And now you'll learn that truth." He lunged suddenly, grabbing Luca's arm, dragging him close. The two struggled, their silhouettes flickering against the stormlight. "Luca!" Elena shouted. The fight ended as abruptly as it began. Raphael stumbled back and fell. The sea swallowed him in one soundless second. Silence returned, broken only by the roar of the ocean. Luca stood there, soaked, motionless, staring into the darkness below. "He's gone," Elena whispered. He didn't answer. When she reached for his hand, he finally looked at her, eyes haunted, hollow. "I didn't want it to end like this. I know." He exhaled shakily, dropping the gun into the mud. "It's over." "No," she said softly. "Now it begins." By dawn, they reached the beach. The world smelled of salt and smoke. The sky streaked with pale pink. Luca walked ahead, his steps heavy. Elena followed, the wind tangling her hair. At the shoreline, he stopped and pulled the hard drive from his pocket. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Finishing it." He stared at the small device, the sum of everything his father had built, and threw it into the sea. The splash was small, almost insignificant. But as it sank beneath the waves, Elena felt something loosen inside her. "Now there's no empire," he said. "No name. Just us." "Then what happens now?" Luca turned toward her, eyes tired but alive. "Now, we see if freedom was worth the price." They walked along the beach until the cliffs disappeared behind them. The world felt endless again, open, raw, uncertain. For the first time, they weren't running. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun began to rise. The days that followed passed in a blur of distance and silence. For the first time in years, there was no chase, no gunfire, no orders whispered through the walls. The world outside was quiet, too quiet for two people who had only known life beneath the roar of chaos. Luca and Elena traveled north along the coast, trading names for aliases, wealth for anonymity. The small towns they passed never asked questions. To the fishermen and innkeepers who saw them, they were simply a young couple with too many shadows in their eyes. They found a small cottage tucked into a cliffside overlooking the sea. The walls smelled of salt and cedar. The windows framed the horizon like a promise. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was safe. And safety was a luxury neither of them had ever learned to trust. Elena awoke one morning to the cry of seagulls and the warmth of sunlight filtering through the curtains. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memories came rushing back. The cliff, the gunshot, the splash that ended an empire. Luca was sitting outside on the porch, his gaze lost to the ocean. His arm was healing, though the bandages peeked out from beneath his shirt. He hadn't spoken much since that night. He barely slept. Elena joined him quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You should eat something," she said gently. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't been for days." He didn't answer. The waves rolled endlessly below them, white against the black rocks. After a long silence, he said, "Every time I close my eyes, I see him fall." She placed a hand over his. "You didn't push him, Luca." "No," he said softly, "but I didn't stop him either." His voice cracked on the last word. She tightened her grip, her thumb brushing his knuckles. "You ended the cycle," she whispered. "He built a world out of fear. You tore it down. That doesn't make you him. It makes you free." He turned then, eyes glistening with something fragile and raw. "I don't know what to do with freedom." Then we learned together. The simplicity of her words seemed to anchor him. Slowly, he exhaled, leaning back against the railing. The tension in his shoulders eased for the first time in days. By the end of the week, they had built a quiet routine. Luca would help repair the fishing nets of the locals, his once immaculate hands now roughened by work. Elena spent her mornings in the market, trading small paintings she'd begun to make for food and supplies. Each night, they sat by the fire, saying little but understanding everything. Sometimes, when the wind was right, she could almost hear Grandma Rose's laughter in the crackle of the flames, a memory, not a ghost. And then, one morning, a letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope with no return address. Elena's hands trembled as she unfolded it. "My dear granddaughter, they tell me you're safe. I don't know where you are, and that's good. It means you're far enough away that he cannot reach you. The doctors say I have little time left, but I rest easily knowing you are free. I always knew your heart would be your courage. Take care of that young man. He reminds me of your grandfather, proud, wounded, and worth saving. Be happy, my love. Grandma Rose." Elena pressed the paper to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. When she looked up, Luca was watching her. "She knows?" he asked. "She knows everything that matters." He smiled faintly. "She sounds strong." "She was," Elena said, smiling through her tears. "She always believed in redemption." He looked away toward the sea. "Then maybe she believed in me before I did." That evening, they walked along the beach. The air was crisp. the sky bruised with twilight. Elena slipped her hand into his, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. They walked until the sand turned to stone, until the only sound was the waves breaking against the shore. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The power, the name?" Luca shook his head. Power was a cage. The name was a chain. Out here, I don't need either. "And what do you need?" He stopped, turning to face her. The last light of the sun burned gold in his hair, softening the sharpness that had once defined him. "You," he said simply. "I just need you." The wind caught his words and carried them out to sea. Elena's breath caught. She'd waited for so long, through fear, through pain, through everything that had tried to tear them apart, to hear something that simple and true. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. He smiled, a first real one she'd ever seen. "Because I wouldn't know how to start over without you." She laughed softly, leaning into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, careful, steady, as if afraid she might vanish if he held too tightly. For the first time, the world didn't feel dangerous. It just felt alive. Months passed. Seasons turned. The Vercetti name faded into rumor, then into silence. Some said the Don's empire collapsed under its own weight. Others whispered that his heir had died alongside him. No one ever connected the quiet painter who lived by the sea with the Mafia bride who vanished from her wedding day. And that was exactly how Elena wanted it. On the anniversary of their escape, she found Luca on the beach again, sketching something in the sand with a stick. When she got closer, she saw what it was, a small heart with a single word written beneath it. Home, strong, P/block post. She smiled. "That's new." He shrugged, brushing sand from his fingers. "Thought I'd try drawing something that doesn't explode." She laughed, sitting beside him. "Not bad for a former criminal." "Former?" he teased. "Mostly." The tide came in, washing the drawing away. But the word lingered in their minds. Home. Not a mansion, not a legacy. Just a place where love had survived what power never could. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, the sea breeze tangling her hair. "Do you ever think about the past?" "Sometimes," he said, "but only to remember how lucky I am it's gone." She smiled. "Then let's never look back." "Deal." They sat there until the stars appeared, scattered like diamonds across the dark. The waves whispered against the shore, steady and eternal. And somewhere in that rhythm, between the sound of the ocean and the beating of their hearts, the ghosts of the past finally let go.